Hi, this is Kara from the Special Needs Mom podcast.
And this is Angela from Especially Organized, Sensible Solutions for Special Needs Moms.
We have this heart for special needs moms. And so we thought, you know what, let's combine forces. And we have come up with what we're calling the Purge Party. And you can pretty much guess what it is. It's a party where we're going to come together and we're going to purge or, in general, accomplish a goal, a small goal together. So we have set this for January 27th, starting at 8 o'clock for my Pacific Coast people,
which means 11 o'clock for all of you on the East Coast. So this is an opportunity. If you have something on your to-do list that has just been stuck there and you are wanting to move it up on the list, you're wanting to tackle, maybe it's a space or an area of your home or a category in your home that has just needed a little time and attention. This is your opportunity for you to be online with us while you work and have access for us to help you answer your questions, help guide you, and just serve you for those 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can tell like what we've designed is just this very high level of support for that project that you just haven't been able to tackle on your own. The thing that we are envisioning is that you get to leave this purge party feeling so accomplished because you did the thing. You started the year off getting that thing done that you were stuck on last year. And so it's a momentum builder, if you will. You can go ahead and sign up. We have a link ready for you. And we are offering this for $40 for the whole experience.
Absolutely. And we hope you'll join us. I think it's going to be really fun. It's going to be a great group of moms of special needs kids. So we all get each other. We all have an understanding of what it's like to have something on our to-do list, but just we haven't been able to tackle it yet. So I hope that you will join us. We're super excited to bring this to you, and we are thrilled to work with you.
All right. We'll see you all there. Hi, I'm Kara, life coach, wife, and mom to 4 incredible and unique children. It wasn't all that long ago that my son received a diagnosis that had my world come crashing down. I lacked the ability to see past the circumstances, which felt impossible, and the dreams I once had for my life and family felt destroyed. Fast forward past many years of surviving and not at all thriving, and you'll see a mom who trusts that she can handle anything that comes her way and has access to the power and confidence that once felt so lacking. I created the Special Needs Mom podcast to create connection and community with moms who find themselves feeling trapped and with no one who really understands. My intention is to spark the flare of possibility in your own life and rekindle your ability to dream. This isn't a podcast about your special needs child. This is a podcast about you. If you are a mom who feels anxious, alone, or stuck, then you are in the right place. Welcome. Hello and welcome to the Special Needs Mom podcast. I'm very glad you're here. And I'm very glad you're going to get to hear this conversation that I have with this mom. Yes, it's an interview style episode. As you know, it's been a hot minute since I have had a guest on the show. And good news is I have a lot of guests coming up for we'll call it the fall season. And she is one of those incredible moms. Let's give you a little bit of what to expect. So our guest is Sehreen Noor Ali. She is, yes, a special needs mom like you and I. So she had reached out to me, sent me this beautiful email, and I was like, okay, yes, you're on the show. And part of preparing for the episode is I have people send me a bunch of information, one of which is a picture. And I opened her picture and I was like, whoa, what a badass. That's what I thought to myself. So I don't know if we're supposed to share our first impressions, if that appropriate anymore. I don't know, but that's what I thought of her. And my judging the book by the cover totally was accurate. This woman, I'm just going to say it. She's a badass. And what I really loved about this conversation is it very organically went off into a bunch of different tangents. Something that really stuck out to me in talking to Sehreen is that she loves herself. I'm just going to say it like that. I'm going to say it bluntly and boldly. We are going to hear that in the end of the episode, that I'm going to make that observation and reflection. And she's able to actually embrace that. And it is a beautiful thing. So I want you to observe that as you listen to her. here's what's interesting. Even though she has this relationship with herself, that doesn't necessarily mean that everything is all figured out. So I think it's important to see how that relationship with herself can coexist with her continual evolution, her continual processing of her grief, and her continual commitment to her work and the platform and the business that she has created. So please pay attention at the end of the episode when we share how to support her and her endeavor, which then will go right back and support you. Once you learn about Sleuth, which is her creation, you will understand more. So we'll go over it all in the episode. Before we jump into our conversation, let me just give you a little bit more backstory of Sehreen and, just kind of set you up a little bit. So she is a mom of two girls, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the episode. And she is a mom who took this experience of having these intense medical needs and used that to evolve into a technology entrepreneur. Her background, interestingly enough, was as a public servant / diplomat with the U.S. Department of State. So she grew up in Virginia and now lives in New York City with her husband and children. And she is committed to doing, as I mentioned earlier, some really incredible things. You're going to love her. Welcome, Sehreen. I am so glad to have you in this conversation. There's so many things I'm excited to talk about. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited too. It's like a twofer for me, like I also get to talk to another mom who's been in the same shoes. So it's amazing.
For me too. So I like that. Let's start by giving everybody a little picture of, again, what I call your becoming, like what has you in the identity of being a special needs mom.
Yeah, I like that of becoming because it's a journey. I think that there was 2 points of my becoming in the journey. The first, when my younger daughter started missing her milestones, and then several years later when we actually got a diagnosis, even though we thought there was never going to be a diagnosis and she was relatively fine with therapy. The first one happened in 2018 and the second one happened in 2021, but a lot of life happened between those 3 years. And I actually started a startup based on what everything she was going through in her early years. So by the time 2021 came, the diagnosis really, really, really came out of nowhere. Like to the point that her doctors called me, like her geneticist called me, who's like one of the best geneticists in New York City, called me, and she's super busy. And she's like, I did not see this coming. And we had just had an appointment with her. And she's like, everything is fine. She's doing great, blah, blah, blah. And so we were in the throes of fundraising. And all of a sudden I had to tell my co-founder, she's getting a major surgery. She's getting a major brain surgery, but we'll be back in a week. But we weren't back for 2.5 months.
I don't know if you know this about my story. That's very similar to our first brain surgery. We were supposed to be in the hospital for 5 days. Maybe a little longer, they said. And we were there for 2 months. And so I really relate to the experience of having that pivot. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later in this conversation, because you've had to do a lot of pivoting. So thank you for sharing that becoming. So kind of your introductory session was in 2018, and then your advanced course was in 2021. I think it's important to acknowledge that 2021 was also, I wouldn't say even right after, but like during the impacts of COVID and all of that. So we had this similar experience where actually we did another brain surgery in 2021 as well. Give me a snapshot of your life now. So you have 2 daughters. I think they're 6 and 8. You're married, and I think it's New York, right? So just give us a quick little snapshot of a day in the life over in your neck of the woods.
A day in the life is usually me telling everyone that I have a lot of work to do. I mean, I think everything has come in phases, right? And every part of the journey has changed something in me. And so one thing that I'm sitting in right now is a lot of gratitude that our life has become a lot more stable, because when she got out of the hospital, our life was very unstable, and you've gone through the same thing. You come home with a lot of change and trauma and medical equipment and maintenance and medicine and follow-up doctors, and balancing work with that. And we have a caregiver. We have an exceptional caregiver. Like really, we're so fortunate. Even with that, I was at max capacity. And so sometimes when I work now, I feel like I'm working to make up for lost time. right? Because like I put everything, my life is family, startup, friends. And like, right, it's really that rough. I mean, it's like really that harsh in some ways. And I feel like my biggest stressor is that when I tell people that I'm working all the time, they actually don't believe me. Unless they're witnessing me work all the time, they literally don't understand when I say, no, I work all the time. And it's this constant stress of like, well, who am I supposed to be in any given moment?
I think balancing all those different roles and identities that we have as a mom, as a woman, as a friend, as a startup entrepreneur, in my, see, a coach and a podcaster, I think it can be very disorienting when someone tosses in an extra one of like, oh, you're going to also be a hospital liver.
Yeah.
That might have been said more eloquently, but like, like to figure it out, like how you said, like, it's hard to figure out who I'm supposed to be all the time.
Totally. It's almost like you're holding all these plates and then something gets thrown to you and you're like, no, but I was already at maximum trying to balance it. Like if one more thing gets thrown at me, everything falls down.
Bingo. I think that's so many of the special needs mom experience can really relate to that. So thanks for sharing that. So you're working hard, you're working your tail off, and you're working on something that you love. And we're going to talk about that later, but we're going to save it. So suspense, all that suspense drive us here. What part of New York are you in?
I live near Columbia University.
Okay.
Which it's interesting that we're talking. I don't generally talk about where I live. It just never comes up. But, I grew up in Northern Virginia, which is very livable, very, very livable. And now I live in New York City. And I think, okay, what if we could move? And I can't because of her doctors. Because it's taken me years. And I know that like other families and moms would understand this. It's taken me years to set up her care team. Like I can't just pick up and go because they know her. The medical records are there. I mean, whoever wants to deal with the transfer of medical records. Like there's so many things I would do before I dealt with the transfer of medical records,
I hear you. I'm going to tell a quick story because it's more like a nightmare. This is years ago. I don't even remember when it was, but my husband had changed something at work with something with our insurance. And I was talking to somebody, I don't even remember what I was talking about, but the person on the insurance line, they told me that I was no longer going to have access to any of the doctors that we had.
Oh my God.
And can you even imagine I remember so vividly the panic over my entire body, like losing all of that in 1 second. It turns out they were very wrong, but I really experienced the trauma of that. And interestingly, also more recently, we've been unhappy with several of the accessibility actually to the doctors that we have. Like we can't get in to see them. So that doesn't really work. So I brought up the idea to my husband, well, maybe we consider like moving to a different hospital system or I don't even know. And I thought about it for a second and I thought, no, I think we just got to suck it through where we're at. Like, I just don't think I can change everything.
The opportunity cost is like, we don't quantify it. Like we know in our bones how much it took. It's not just the phone calls. It's not just logistics. It's the sheer persistence, right? Like there's no number for that. It's like, no, you could tell people, oh yeah, it's hard to set up like doctor's appointments, but you can't express the amount of mama bear you have to go into.
Oh my gosh. What's funny is the call after this is going to be me calling one of our doctors to essentially say, it doesn't work if my son can't see you. I got a message saying that the appointment that we had that was already too late is no longer available because the provider's out of town. So I'm going to be like, okay, so what are our options here? Because it doesn't work if my son has a doctor that he can't see.
A sidebar on that. So I had a situation with a customer service situation, not on the medical side, on something totally different. And it was like a gym and they were charging me and I don't even go to it. Like it's this whole thing. And I thought I canceled it. And my reaction, I feel a little bit bad about my reaction because it was very firm. It was fair. And I was like, look, either you can give me a refund me or I can go to my credit card company. And I've been feeling really guilty about that since the phone call happened. And I think it's because I am so used to going from 0 to 1, right? Because you're constantly fighting. And it's like, And I'm like, oh, wait, no. There needs to be an intermediate response here. That's like, like, isn't there an animal between like human and mama bear that I can like, in those moments? I haven't quite figured it out, but I would really like to.
Well, I want to mention this because I think it's so applicable, because I so feel you on this. And I think that there are so many things that happen that I think evoke, I'll say, anger for me, or feeling of needing to like mama bear. And then I think if we don't intentionally work on processing all that, then we very, very easily go and have conversations like that to your gym, which I don't think you did anything wrong. And because I was literally talking to my son about this morning. So I'll tell a quick story again. Yesterday, we went to try to go get our routine labs and failed because he's a really hard stick. I was telling you this before the call. And then they suggested, hey, this practitioner, the provider will be, a different person will be here tomorrow. She was the one that was successful last time. So why don't you come back tomorrow? So what other option do I have? So we walked out and I went back this morning. And this morning, the person who was successful last time came out and explained to us that, oh, like your hospital doesn't allow us to do it anymore. You have to go to this lab or this lab. So we were turned away. And this is particularly frustrating because it's fasting labs. And so I have to take him in the morning because I'm not going to make him go hungry all day. And the next couple of days, I can't go in the morning without canceling more of my life. And so I'm like, dang, that happened. And I was mad, like really mad. Like I felt it real clearly in my body. And so Levi and I were driving home, and I actually was going to be jumping right into a session in one of my coaching groups. And I was like, all right, we can't be jumping into coaching with this energy. Like we have to do this now. And so I was like, Levi, I'm feeling mad. How are you feeling? And I said, don't you just feel like yelling? And so he and I both like allowed our anger to manifest itself in the form of yelling, and just yelled our little hearts out in the car. I plugged my ears because I didn't want to hurt myself. But it feels oddly relieving to be able to do that. So I then could go into to do my work, not literally holding back the rage that was there. And I mentioned this because I told Levi a story at the time, and it was, kind of teachable moment for my son. I'm like, yeah, we have to do this. There's so many things, if we hold it in, and it actually is harmful, or we end up doing things like, and I reminded him of the time that there was like an Uber driver that was delivering food, Uber Eats driver, parked in one of the handicapped spots at school. And I didn't yell at her, but I was pretty firm about the concept.
I yelled at her, but I did not yell at her.
Well, okay, I wasn't yelling at her, but the conversation I had was very aggressive. I'll say that way. That it was like one of those things where I'm like, okay, that was a lot. Like this lady for sure got the expression of my anger that I didn't deal with earlier. And that's the whole reason I wanted to bring it up is, yes, what we deal with on a daily basis requires so much, I'll call it maintenance, to be able to kind of wash away all the rage so that it doesn't come out exploding on other people all the time. So thanks for bringing that up. The
story about the Uber driver is actually really important, because when you live this life and you have a broader perspective because of what we're learning through our children, then you start seeing a lot of inequalities, and like, yes, I wish we had seen it before, but I went off at the public pool that my kids go to on Sunday because they don't have a caregiver policy. And like, really, my child would have been fine. But my point was, there are people with disabilities and needs and other needs. How do you not have a caregiver policy to let them into the locker room? You don't understand. You are excluding so many people, and we take it upon ourselves to make it known.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's kind of needed.
There's so many stories I could tell about the desire. I think ultimately we see these inequalities, we see these issues, and we feel sometimes like a victim of them and powerless. And so I think our response to that is like, we want justice. We want to fight for what we see is right. And so sometimes that comes out on people that, I don't want to say inappropriate, but the people that actually are not at fault for it. Not that they can't be part of the solution. So like even this morning when the gal was nicely turning me away, she was maybe suggesting some other options. I don't know even what exactly I said, but I said, I'm going to go down to children's instead of trying something else. And she's like, yeah, just make an appointment there and you'll be good. And I looked at her and it was like, it's like the worst department to deal with. You wait for like 30 minutes to get an appointment, of which they don't have. And then they're really rude when you get there. So I'm like, it's like one of my least favorite departments at Rady Children's Hospital. And if any of you listening that can make a difference, I have some words. I explained to her a little bit, but I noticed the temptation to really want to make her understand how crappy the situation is. And I'm like, she didn't need that. Like, that's not her problem. But that's what I mean about like, it comes out in all sorts of other places, almost like misdirecting, just because we're feeling it all the time from all different areas. Okay. Well, thanks for indulging that sidebar. We didn't have that planned, although we have a lot to say about that. So where do we want to go? Let's talk a little bit about the season that you've shared that you're in right now in terms of how you share your story, like what you choose to share and what you choose not to share. And what I'm particularly interested in is something that you had shared with me, which is that life as a special needs mom for you has been largely about performance. And if you'll just start by maybe describing a little bit about what you mean by that, like for you, how the performance piece is coming in, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. I think the thing that I used to believe is that people can understand what we're going through. And it's related to how I kind of showed up. But I always try to make it palpable to other people, because I think that when you are a caregiver, sometimes it's so hard and it's so bad that you actually can't believe it. Like, you can't make someone else understand. And so in order to make someone understand a glimpse of it, I would hide the really bad parts. So there's something that happened at the hospital that I don't share with people because it's so gory. You know, you can't metabolize it. And so I don't talk about what happened in the hospital actually almost at all to anyone. And so that's part of the hiding in the real world, right? In my everyday world, where I get to like hang out with friends or family or talk to people in my business, I mostly talk about, oh yeah, like there's a therapist that comes, or like, oh, I got to take this phone call because it's the doctor. But that's 20% of the story. And so it is a constant performance because I have to work like I don't have caregiving responsibilities, and I have to caregive like I don't work. So inherently there's performance. And then because as a society, we are not used to grappling with grief and trauma, when you tell someone, or when I tell someone a glimpse of what's happening, they feel bad for me. And that's not where I want to be. Like, I feel very grateful and fortunate for my life with everything that has gone through. I'm super happy being me. So if someone said to me, like, I don't know how you do, or some version of I don't know how you do it, it feels like they don't get it. And so I'd rather perform than have them misunderstand me. I'd rather perform. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like, I would rather them think of me as like powerful and can do a lot of stuff in some ways than feel sorry for me. And so I have to hide some of that truth. And frankly, like, as a VC-backed startup, I have to work nonstop. So I don't want stakeholders to be like, well, she's weak, or like she's preoccupied or something like that. And so it's like a lot of balancing of different things. And then the words around special needs and medical needs, I honestly it's never really settled for me. And so I kind of feel like I'm playing a game of mental Tetris on how people perceive me. And I'm not quite sure how I want to be perceived.
Well, what I want to point out is that, well, you're not alone. And I think that the amount of conversations that I have with women, with moms about this is actually really up there. Because as human beings, it's very important for us to belong. And part of belonging is being accepted. And part of being accepted is feeling like you're doing like the right things.
Yeah.
And I think so much of what it takes to be in our shoes is even in our own minds, as we like look around us, like it's very different. And then we associate different to wrong or like other than. So we're already othered, and that feels very, very threatening. we end up spending a lot of energy trying to, and I'll put it in my wording, but I think it's what you're saying, to control how other people think of us. Ultimately, it is not a winnable game. We think we can kind of control it a little bit, but we actually don't have as much agency in that area that like we give ourselves credit for. But it doesn't stop us from trying.
Yeah.
And if you think about this dance that you're playing with kind of what to show people, or what you think you're supposed to show people because of who you think you're supposed to be, what comes up for you when you think about like, what do you really not want them to see that you think they're going to see if you share it all?
I think my number one concern is I don't want to betray her own story for when she's able to tell it. That haunts me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other part is everyone who's working on our startup has sacrificed a lot, particularly me and my co-founder. I don't want to do anything that compromises it because I believe in what we're building. It's so much more than a business to me. You know, for me, it is about how kids should be treated, all kids. So if someone looks at my story and says she's not capable of being a co-founder, I would be crushed. I would be on the floor crushed because I know that I can do it. I know that I can balance it. And I don't want that. I don't want this opportunity to be taken away from me, I think, more than anything, because I really, truly believe in it so much. And I fear the idea, and I think this is like actually predates a startup. And I think a lot of us are kind of like alpha performers. I fear someone calling me incompetent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think that is deeply ingrained in a lot of us. Like you're probably onto something where it does predate a lot of this. This happens to be really exposing it. And when you were sharing, I had a thought, and it's my opinion. Are you open to hearing it?
Totally.
This is my opinion. I think that your story is why you can be this co-founder versus your story, all of it in its entirety, being at threat of that. What do you think about that?
There is a part of me that's become really, I went from an optimist to a realist after the journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there's part of what you're saying is right? There's also a part of me that knows the system I'm working on looks at me as a woman and as a brown woman. And I cannot contend with anything. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not in my control anymore. Just like, imagine if I was a man, right? And a caregiver. I think that we are so much more ready to see a man as like being capable in business than we are seeing a woman as being capable in business. And that's a perception. I have data points that kind of prove that people asked me, like, can you do this? Right. And I'm not even mad about it, actually, because what I realize is that we're working in two different games. Like the way caregiving goes is a different game than the way making a business goes. They're just two different games, you know? And like, yes, I do believe, and I have been doing both effectively, but I don't think most people can recognize that because there's just too much misunderstanding around caregiving, right? Like, and I know in my bones, just the way that anyone who's listening to this, like, we are outperforming everybody. Bar none. Like my mom the other day, she's like, you know, I said something. She's like, you know, you're really, really hard on yourself. And she's like, without your tenacity, your daughter wouldn't be where she is today. But nobody says that to me except her. You know, there's no benchmarks.
And I would say, as you say that, even I think sometimes the different providers that we see, I'm sure you have your own handful, they're so focused in their area. There's been several times where doctors have stepped back and looked at me and just said, wow. And honestly, it felt like very moving because I think so much of it is just like they're looking in their own little category and not acknowledging how their piece fits in our puzzle. and how they have to look at the puzzle to actually have their piece be effective for our puzzle. Does that make sense?
You're the puzzle maker.
Yeah. 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 We're dealing with some issues right now where, well, long story short, it's not working in terms of he's not getting the care he needs. And I'm seeing the effects of that. And I need the people we're working with to see everything together in order to actually help come up with a solution. Because if they just look at their little corner, it looks very easy. Oh, just do this or do that. I'm like, well, let's just put that in the whole picture here. Let me paint the picture for you and why that's not working. Anyhow, that's a little side shoot. Yeah, I can see how the data that you have that suggests that people will have different expectations or assumptions of you because of the body that you live in, and how as a result you feel like you need to show up in a way that defends for that. It's kind of proving against that. Right. So I think there's an opportunity for sure to kind of integrate more and to acknowledge that that does exist and recognize some areas that you just may not want to push back against right now. Yeah. For your own survival and just, what you need now.
And I think I've come to a place where I'm like, I don't really care. Like, it's so funny. I went out to dinner with friends and I dressed up and they were like, oh my God, you look so good. Like you never, and like, I'm always the one, if I'm going to hang out with friends, I'm going to like be comfortable because I feel like I have to dress up for a lot of stuff. So they're like, where did you get that top? I was like, oh, it's from Old Navy. And they started laughing. And they were like, you are the friend who one day you'll like show up in whatever athletic wear. And the next day you're literally meeting the president of the US, which has happened. And I pitched Sleuth. And I was like, yeah, because like, I don't care anymore. I'm not really out there. I think what I'm now trying to do is like reconcile for myself. I am primary now. Mm-hmm. Everyone else is secondary. I think that's the next iteration of the performance thing, which is like, now what? There's these narratives around what does it look like to be a female founder? Like Inc. had a thing about like, oh, there's like the top 45. I don't look like anything. Like my wardrobe doesn't look like that. My day doesn't look like that. My body doesn't look like that. Right. And so part of me is like me coming into my own and saying, all of us are narrative makers. Why can't I make up my own narrative of what it's like to be me? And that has been a really fun place to experiment with. Because there used to be a time 2 years ago when I was like, well, I knew a few caregivers that had started venture-backed companies. And it made me feel like, oh, maybe I can't do this. Maybe it's because it's just so damn hard, maybe I'm going to fail. And now you slowly meet more. And now I'm like, well, I feel like I have this opportunity where things have worked out in my favor that have been largely out of my control, really, have kind of like fallen into my lap. Like I have an excellent co-founder. All these, I live in a place where it's easier to start a startup than somewhere else. And I'm like, okay, well, like stop complaining and do something with it,
Well, from what you just shared about not caring as much and just describing the experience that you've moved into of seeing how you kind of don't fit what you perhaps thought should be or what other people think should be. But the way that you described it to me sounds like you've entered into this really genuine acceptance of who you are. And even then moving towards loving who you are, which is a huge step. Does it feel like that for you? Does that feel like that's what's happening?
It's so funny that you say that. Yeah, it's the biggest difference. You're so perceptive. Like, I really do now prioritize myself as like a person in my life to love and to care for and to nourish. And that is not something that I did, for most of my life. And I think it's something that I want to pass on to my kids, that ironically, my younger one with like the medical issues, she did that. She's been doing that forever. She'll look at a picture of herself and like in the family, and she'll give everyone a kiss in the family. She'd be like, my favorite person is this, 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 and me. And I'm like, isn't that revolutionary?
Don't you love when you see your kids like being profound? You're like, you've got it. I'm
Right.
learning from you. Thank
Right.
you,
I was
little
like,
one.
and maybe I won't mess you up because you
I
have your own
know.
internal system.
I know. Just keep going with that. Ignore everything I do and say, you've got it already.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one thing. I'm 40. Oh, dang it. Am I 42 or 43? I'm 43. Okay. Clearly I haven't been paying attention, but I kind of love getting older. I think my later 30s is the part where I'm like, oh, yeah, I kind of like who I am.
That's awesome.
Versus like always feeling inadequate and all that. Not that it's not perfect over here. Like we have a lifelong endeavor of work to do, but
coming into your own. Yeah.
It's a nice transition to make, to be able to have your own back, you know?
It does. It is. It is.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm 41 and I turned 40 2 days after she got out of the hospital. That was like my thing with God. I was like, just give me help on my 40th, please, you know? But I think what's hard is it's kind of ironic when you are parenting a child whose body works differently. Because I am very hard on myself about turning 40, right? And all the changes that come and what it means and the performance around that. Like, you know, you're supposed to do all these things, but look like you have a 25-year-old body. It's kind of amazing how we can, I'll speak for myself. I can separate like, oh, I'm supporting this body, you know, as a caregiver, but I cannot give myself the same grace in terms of functioning. It's like, no, you are supposed to function perfectly. You're supposed to, you know, at the peak of your body. And I wonder if that is just, we're obsessed with bodies. We're obsessed with perfectly functioning bodies. And when they don't function perfectly, we still can't get the care. Like, look how much you're struggling just this week.
I know. And I was like, well, I see why we're obsessed. It's like, gosh, if in our minds, I think it's like, well, if we didn't have all these body malfunctions, the bodies weren't doing all the things that they were doing that require the care, it feels like it would be easier. And who knows, maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't, but I can see why we're obsessed though. But I mean, I'm even thinking about, you know, how you said you're parenting somebody whose body works differently. And I relate to that very much. And I think to your point, like we relate to ourselves so differently, but also the same. And where I'll make the bridge is where I've always been an athlete. Like I was a college athlete, and I think, you know, there's the athletic mentality. And so I kind of put that on my child that he should have that mentality, and he doesn't, or I just really don't understand from an experiential standpoint what it's like to have a body that does not do what I want it to do. Well, I mean, I do, because I really wasn't that good of an athlete. I mean, I really wanted it to move faster. Let's put it that way. And it didn't. But jokes aside, his body really is not cooperating for what he wants it to do. And for me to like mentally wrap my mind around that, of like when he should push and when he should just accept and when I should accept. I mean, I don't know. Like it is constantly challenging me and asking me to kind of live in both acceptance, but also going to all the therapies to still try to
but that's a really hard mental load for us.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Because how do we remain responsible, but also let it be? I don't know how to do. I don't think we get guidance.
Here's the interesting thing about acceptance. And I think this is fascinating. There's actually a really good podcast between Brene Brown and Tim Ferriss, and it's years ago, but one of my clients resurfaced it, sent it over, and it was like a really good re-listen. They're talking about this correlation between, so a lot of us assume that if we accept something, then we will become complacent. That's the fear. That's the assumption. But actually, it's the opposite that happens. When we accept something, we can actually approach it in such a different way. We don't just roll over and be like, oh, okay, well, it is what it is. I can't think of an example, like for my son, accepting that he has right now a lot of unknown pain. Yeah. Accepting it is actually just like, you know, releasing the judgments and the resistance to that thing. But actually, when I just let that thing be, I'm able to approach it as like so much more effectively when I'm also committed to him being out of pain. To your point, like it's a lot of mental load. It is a lot of emotional load because we're holding two incongruent thoughts at one time. And it is possible, like we do this all the time, but it's like allowing two things to be true at once that don't feel like they go together. And that's kind of this acceptance versus taking action kind of stuff.
Yeah. But it's also the performance because we're supposed to perform, right? In the US, motherhood is a performance, not like an acting, but like an endurance, like a productivity thing. And so that is particularly hard because it's against the backdrop of always having to do.
Yes. And this is why we have the narrative of for mothers of they should always be busy. Like it's actually of this badge of honor. Oh, I'm so busy. And that actually, if we weren't busy and stressed, we would be doing it wrong. Like there would be something where like people would be like, something's wrong with you. You're not supposed to be so happy or so like unstressed out. Like what's wrong with you? And this goes back to what I mentioned earlier about this belonging piece. So it's almost like we're self-perpetuating this cycle of all of us being stressed out and anxious and overwhelmed and unfulfilled and unconnected, all these things, because that's what we see everybody else doing.
Yeah.
And so my commitment on this earth is to break that cycle and to be an example of somebody doing it differently so that somebody else can be like, oh, okay, well, that person did it and like seemed to go okay for her. So I can perhaps break this cycle as well. And the one also about like being under supported. This is the thing where I think that the huge difference between what I see, because I work in, corporate coaching as well. And this does not go for all men at all and all women, but the way that we relate to getting help and support. And, even putting it in the professional world, it looks so much different between how a woman approaches it and who she thinks she needs to be able to be successful and the way she shows up versus him. And
totally.
Behind the scenes, it's like we're self-perpetuating this unknowingly. And that's why it's helpful to kind of, break it down, slow it down and talk about it like we are today.
Yeah. So glad you're doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I want to make sure this conversation is just so interesting to me and thank you. And I want to make sure we have a good amount of time to talk about sleuth because we've been alluding to this thing that you're doing and we haven't told anybody about what that is. And so if you would, please just tell us, what is sleuth?
Yeah. So sleuth is a children's health platform, data platform where parents understand, manage, and predict their child's health. And it is built on the expertise of 62,000 parents who've shared with us what the symptomology, what their child has, what the condition is, what they've used in order to get answers that's been effective. And so it's an app that people can get on the App Store. And the idea is really in the same way that you might be tracking your own health because there are trackers and tools and screeners. There's nothing like that for kids. And so we are putting those tools out in the market. They are science-backed. My co-founder is a researcher. He has a PhD. We have pediatrician advisors. And so what we're really trying to help parents do is like get a grasp on what's going on, particularly for the most common conditions around children's health. So if you want to know if your child has a speech delay or if their speech is on track, you can take a quiz. You can input what you're seeing. And then because we're a smart AI platform, what we're able to give back to you is a visualization of that and an understanding if you need to then go to your pediatrician sooner, or if you need to get help sooner, if you need to call early intervention, if you need to think about a therapist. And so most kids will fortunately be within normal, but parents don't know what's normal. Mm-hmm. And so we're really helping answer that question, like, is what my kid is doing normal? And it's funny, like Alex put in our Slack channel, we were looking at the graph about sleeping and kids resisting sleeping. And they resist. And at age 9, they stop resisting as much. And when he sent the graph, I like laughed out loud because it's exactly what we're experiencing at home with my 9-year-old who has never wanted to go to sleep until this summer. And I was like, this is so strange. I was like, it's kind of cool that like, this is totally normal.
I love, and then you're like, and then I know it's normal. Typical, right? Like that is amazing. How did you think of this idea? Like bring me back to like the beginning here.
Yeah.
Of like, how did this come up for you?
It came up from what I went through with my younger daughter. You know, I was working at Kaplan, the big education company, And I literally had to just quit my job to figure out what was going on because I could not get doctor's appointments and I could not get straight answers. And then when I finally got a half answer, what I had to do was set up the therapies. And as I was on this journey to get more information, where did I go? Facebook. And some of the best clues I got were from other moms. They weren't complete answers, right? It's like you're talking about the puzzle piece. They were pieces to a puzzle that I put together myself. But it turns out that when you crowdsource data from thousands and thousands of parents, you actually get really accurate information. And so it's this marriage of us knowing that parents are each other's number one resource. And people would be like, oh, but I hate Facebook groups. You're like, we would be like, oh, mom groups, like moms don't know what they're talking about. It's like, actually, they do. As a group, we really know what we're talking about and we're super savvy. And when we started testing it, it just proved it out. It's like, Alex is a data scientist. He's like, yes, crowdsourced information has always been accurate. This is not a new phenomenon. It's just that no one did it with kids' health and parents.
I have firsthand experience of this being true. It wasn't on your app, but we'll get it on there. When my son was going through his proton beam radiation, we were having different symptoms. And I asked the doctors about it. I'm like, this is what's happening. And it had to do with one of his pre-existing medical conditions as a result of his first tumor. And his radiologist was like, no, that wouldn't happen. His endocrinologist, no, that wouldn't happen. And I go to our tumor group and they're like, yeah, we had that experience too.
Yeah.
And not everybody, but some people. And I was like, there you go. Because all you want to know as a mom is like, hey, like what's happening here and how do I support my child through this? So It was so interesting getting the vast different experience from the doctor's experience and their perspective and the lived experience of what happens and what these kids are going through and how do we help them and all that. So it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
What does it feel like to be able to look at this product, this support platform that you have created and to see how accurate it is? What does it feel like? I mean, to like look at that and see what you've created.
I'll find out in like 6 weeks because our full product comes out in 6 weeks.
Well, but you know what's happening.
We're in testing. I mean, I think I'm waiting for that moment though. Like I'm waiting for the moment where other parents can be like, this is like when we did testing, I felt that in testing, like we did testing and people were like, I can't believe this is so accurate. I can't believe your tracker is so, is so good and this and that. So we got a glimpse of it, but I think it's similar to how you feel like, how we feel like a special needs mom and we feel like no one understands and then someone understands. I feel like I'm in the moment before someone is going to understand,
because people they don't have that live experience yet to be like, oh my gosh, it did this. It's more like, I'm telling you it's going to do this thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like my friends or on social media have been talking about it a lot. And this is a product that took a lot of R&D. It's a really technology intensive product. And so it's easy to be skeptical, right? Just like we were talking about before, it's like, however you show up into the world, I get mansplained all the time. Like, it's like a ridiculous phenomenon at this point.
I can imagine in your industry, it happens a lot.
Yeah. And so it's like, well, just wait 6 weeks. So I'm excited for that.
Okay. But then backing up a little bit. Yes, I know it's not out in the world yet, but that doesn't mean you haven't accomplished some really major things, right? So okay. So you feel proud. And I feel like I can only imagine. I mean, it sounds very complex what you have created. It is
very complex.
Very
especially
complex.
So the data that informs our database right now almost exactly matches the racial and income demography of the US. So that's really important to us. And like, that's a huge accomplishment and it was hard. And it took a lot of hard work to make sure that we were collecting from all over the US. So everyone's experiences was reflected. And I think the second thing is, you go into these hospital settings all the time. And I can only imagine that you are sometimes dismissed. There is this win, I feel, of like mothers who know their stuff and who we're demonstrating how much they know and how much I really believe at some point we're just going to get these pediatric health insights that don't exist without this expertise from moms.
I think you're 100% right there. I'm 100% with you. And I would love to see that shift where providers and physicians acknowledge this as to be part of, and some do, obviously. Some are really, really good at this. And some are like, yeah, don't tell me about your mom group. And, to their point, there's some probably not very helpful stuff going on there too. But like, we can't just dismiss it because, who is more driven to help their child than the mother standing before them or father? But in this case, we're talking about us moms. Okay. Wow. Well, I'm really excited. So how will we tell all these people what's next? How do I support you in this journey?
You're so kind. I appreciate it. Well, I will let you know when our product comes out in 6 weeks, and please share it widely and please give me feedback. We are just going to go deeper and deeper into different conditions and symptoms as we grow. And so come along with us for the ride and please use us. And a lot of it is free, and we're putting a premium product, and our premium product is still really affordable. Like, you get a lot. We're looking at around between like $60 to $7 a year. Like, for the amount of technology that we're putting into this, it's a huge value.
Yeah, that feels very accessible. And I love when there's the free and premium offer, right? It's kind of amazing accessibility. I think we all, as moms in this space, appreciate that. So here's my request to y'all listening is that I will share when this is available as a little reminder, mostly probably on Instagram, but that my request is that y'all share it in your Facebook groups, where these little hubs, because what we all collectively know is so valuable. And I'm just thinking of all of my people that have all these very unique syndromes and conditions and genetic differences, where this could even further the support that they're able to produce as communities of different syndromes.
It's almost like I always envision like going to these groups and saying, could we almost do like a Wikipedia effort? Like, put everything you know into this, and we'll analyze it and give it back to you. And it's like, that's someplace that I want to be in the next year. I mean, we could do it now, but just like that concentrated effort, because I know deep in my bones, we're going to find out stuff that we knew, but that we need to share across like the medical system.
Well, now with like AI being such a part of it, like, cause I use AI for different little things all the time, and it's like mind blowing already. Right. And so for you putting that steroid into what you're already doing with your systems and data is amazing. So, okay. So that's our request, is that you go to your groups, you share this, and you support this in service of supporting first Sehreen, secondly, in supporting the community of us parents trying to get all the best things for our kids. Thank you so much for being here, for the conversation, for reaching out. It was such a pleasure to have you as a guest.
It was so amazing to be here. I like therapy. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. All right. We'll see y'all in the next episode. One more thing before we officially wrap up this show. Sometimes when I'm listening to podcasts, I have the experience of wanting more. I'm listening at the very end thinking, I sure wish that episode didn't end. I invite you, if you feel in any way the same way, I invite you to the Special Needs Mom podcast community, which is a free group that I host on Facebook, where we as a community of fellow moms who listen to this podcast and are experiencing life in similar shoes, get to talk to one another, get to share stories, get to actually interact. I hope you'll consider joining. See you over there.